got a few more people still joining us today, but welcome everybody to our third session of our Backyard Natural Resources webinar series. Today we're going to have Dr. Amanda Bachmann joining us, and I'll introduce her just in a minute. But first, feel free to put any questions that you may have during this session into the chat or into the Q&A, and then we'll go ahead and get those all answered at the end, just so we kind of can get those batched and don't have to interrupt the flow of ideas. But anyway, here's Amanda. Amanda is our urban entomology field specialist with SDSU Extension based in Pierre. She has a background in vegetable pest entomology and earned her PhD in entomology from Penn State. As an urban entomologist, she works not only with the traditional urban pests like bed bugs and mosquitoes, but also urban pollinators and other beneficial insects, as well as helping specialty crop producers with insect issues. With the SDSU Extension Horticulture team, she's an instructor for the South Dakota Master Gardener Program and is one of the regular hosts for Garden Hour. She's also an executive committee member for the South Dakota Volunteer Naturalists and a state co-coordinator for South Dakota SARE, which is the Sustainable Agriculture and Research and Education. So with that, Amanda, go ahead and tell us all about bugs and blooms in our garden.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. Let me share my screen here. Okay. It looks good. So thanks everybody for joining in today. Just moving around some of my little Zoom things. But yeah, I'm going to talk about balancing bugs and blooms. So for those of you that have met me before, I'm very much a fan of arthropods, and I think that more people should care about them and be cool with having them in their gardens. So, reasons why we should care about arthropods: they do a lot of things in the ecosystem for us. I notice sort of a lot of times, especially when I'm doing like master gardener training, that when we talk about arthropods, it's only in the context of pests. Like the only thing they're doing out there is making our lives more difficult. However, they do good things for us. We have decomposers out there. We have obviously our pollinators, which are, sort of our gateway insects that get a lot of people into this world. And then we also have our biomass movers. So these are things that are taking energy through the food chain, and some of them might be what we consider pests, but they are an important part of our ecosystem. Backyard gardening has a lot of challenges. We have many different crops. I can think of, I probably have 10 different vegetables in my small garden right now. That also comes with a lot of critters, both with 6 legs and possibly 4 legs, maybe even 2 legs. And also, our tolerance for damage varies. So, if you've got maybe a prized rose bush, you might be treating that differently than, say, the zucchini in August that you're really tired of eating zucchini. In backyard gardens, we also have short pre harvest intervals. So, we don't have a lot of time between when a crop is ready and maybe when we can treat. So, we'll talk a little bit about that later. And in a backyard garden, we are generally short on time. I know, many of us are out here, working a day job, a night job, a third job. We're here at a sort of a lunch hour, lunch and learn. And, what can we do in our garden to maybe speed up some of our processes, make watering easier, make harvesting easier, and give us a little bit more time to scout for some of the arthropods that we're going to talk about. So, how do we handle the challenges in a backyard garden? For me, a big one is to get cool with beneficial insects and arthropods. The more you know, like insert graphic here, the more you know about what's in your backyard and how those things are helping you, the more that you can recognize that many of the things you're seeing are things that you can just let live their life and that they don't warrant any intervention or treatment. You can also adjust your tolerance for damage. So maybe realizing that, kale is not your favorite vegetable this year, and perhaps you're just gonna let the cabbage loopers have it and maybe not plant it next year. And also, I want everybody to become a backyard detective. So, learning more about what's in your backyard, learning how to go through the identification steps, how to use your resources, and how to figure out what's there so that you're not spraying first and asking questions later. I get so many questions from folks, and they're like, hey, I've got this thing going on, in my yard or with my tree or whatever, and I don't know what it is, but I either have sprayed or I want to spray. And I'm like, can we pause? Can we pause for just a moment and figure out the ID first before you spend time and money on a treatment? So, becoming a backyard detective is really just a more fun way to say using integrated pest management. IPM is an acronym that you might see in a lot of places, especially related to large scale agriculture, but it's a concept that you can use on a small scale as well. And it's really about combining strategies to solve problems while decreasing risk. So we're going to put a bunch of stuff together and hopefully come up with a formula that you can use in your own garden or property. So integrated pest management is a cycle. You'll notice a fun little graphic here that we're going to start with pest monitoring and record keeping, and we're going to go around that circle until we get to the end where we're reassessing the effect of your program, and then you're starting all over again. So we're going to touch on each of these things today. Every bullet point here could probably be its own lunch and learn seminar. So don't worry, this is being recorded. You can review it later. But we'll start with monitoring and record keeping. This is a really big one. Go out and take a look. Spend some time in your garden, take a look at what's on leaves, take a look at what's visiting the flowers, possibly use some trapping. You can use passive traps, so something like a sticky card. You can get those at a lot of greenhouses or big box stores, but they'll catch anything that comes to them. And you can kind of take a look at that every couple days or every week just to get an idea of what is moving around in your ecosystem. You can also actively sample, so using a sweep net, and then putting the critters in a gallon zip top bag or in the bottom of a bucket to count or take pictures of that way. And then keep notes. I know we still have some garden journals floating about, and they'll be at various activities this summer. I think the Garden Discovery Fest is the next one coming up, that if you come join us, you can grab a garden journal and use that as a place to record your observations. I kind of unofficially keep notes using my phone and essentially my Instagram. Like every year, I'm taking a picture of the first tomato or taking pictures of the cool bugs I'm seeing, and then I can kind of scroll back through that and see what what I've seen and approximately when during the year do I see it. So, pest identification, it really helps to have a body. So you want to capture or otherwise record the critter. Containers, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Old mismatched Tupperware, a zip top bag, a pill bottle, any of those things can be used to catch or hold insects. Obviously, nets, if you have them, various kinds of traps. Some of those are a little bit more involved, but if you are maybe a small scale producer or producing for a farmer's market, you might consider investing in some of the different traps, especially if there's a certain kind of insect that you are really looking to monitor, like maybe squash vine borer in your pumpkins. And then taking pictures. So if you've got your critters in a gallon zip top bag, you can pop that in the fridge to chill them out for about 15 minutes. And then you can take really great pictures until they warm up. And so if it's something that you want to release, so maybe you've got like some bumblebees or some other pollinators and you're just curious about the biodiversity, you can chill them out, take pictures, and let them go. But maybe say you've got a massive grasshopper problem and you're trying to get a handle on what species you have, you can absolutely pop those in the freezer and not feel super bad about it. But having a good picture can go a long way to helping you identify the problem. And it also helps us help you if you've got a good picture to work with. So yeah, identify the body. Send us pictures, send us samples, and then use your identification resources. We have a lot of flip guides available through SDSU Extension, and I know I'll have those with me at the Garden Discovery Fest on Sunday at McCrory Gardens. So if you want a natural enemy flip guide or one on spiders, definitely stop and see me and I can hand you those. There's also, field guides. There's some really good resources online, things like iNaturalist that you can take a picture and post it, and the community will help you source an identification. But also realizing that getting to species isn't always the goal. Sometimes just getting to maybe the family or the genus, coupled with the kind of damage you're seeing, is enough to give you sort of an educated and informed look at what kind of treatment you should be working with. But yeah, what type of damage are you observing can be a really big one. Is leaf material missing? Like, what kind of pattern is the missing material in? Because there are some things like abiotic factors or weather that can also mimic arthropod damage. So yeah, for identification, a lot of times people see an insect on a plant and they're like, what is this insect and why is it killing my usually tree? And excuse me for 1 second. Okay, so yeah, people thinking, an insect is on a plant, it must be killing it is sort of the default assessment. And that's not always the case. Just because an insect is hanging out doesn't mean it's causing any damage. In this image here, I have a very adorable moth that's just hanging out on a milkweed plant, not doing anything bad, just chilling. But yeah, there are other things that cause plant damage. We've got weather conditions, so things can get sunburned. Drought can impact plants. Hail can tear up leaves. We also have pathogens, so our various plant fungi, our bacteria, even viruses, and those we have the plant diagnostic clinic to help us out with. But yeah, just because you see a plant that is sickly does not mean that it's always an arthropod that's causing it. So yeah, proper identification is going to get you better management or even no management. Sometimes it's just a really cool insect that's just hanging out, living its life, and not going to be bothering you at all. When we identify things, we're also looking at the life stage of the organism. So with insects, we have a couple of orders that go through complete metamorphosis. So that's the sort of traditional egg, larva, pupa, adult. When you've got butterflies, like that's the life cycle that we teach to kids. You've got that caterpillar, so that's that larval stage. That is generally very different from the adult. So you've got caterpillars that are munching on leaves, and then you've got the adult butterfly, which is a nectar feeder. So occupying very different places in the ecosystem, very different niches, and doing different things. So that kind of identification is important. And then again, going back to the various plant diseases, bacteria, viruses, fungi, they all have very different treatments. You're not going to put an antibiotic out for a virus. Sorry, I had to do a quick water break. Um, Talking for an extended period of time. Not super used to it. But yeah, with identification, use your resources and your experts. We have a bunch of us on the Ask Extension widget, which I will actually move to here so you can see the link. But there's a bunch of us there, especially if you've got maybe a multi-pronged problem. I can see it, Robin can see it. We've got Dr. Lang, Dr. Burrows. There's a lot of us on the widget. We also have the plant diagnostic clinic that I mentioned earlier, especially with plant diseases. This is where you can actually send a physical plant sample. There is a fee for most of the services, but it is very reasonable. We also have our garden hotlines across the state. So we have Pierre, Rapid City, Aberdeen, and then sort of Brookings and Sioux Falls. So you can, any of your, various gardening questions can go that way. And if they don't know the answer, they will get it to one of us who can help you out. If you are near the Peer Regional Center, you can drop off arthropods here or send them in the mail. But if you're mailing, please use a hard-sided container. It doesn't have to be in a box, but it should be in some sort of a vial, like in this picture, so that it doesn't get squished in the mail on its way to me. I also appreciate it if those critters are frozen so that they are dead on arrival. That means, that makes sure that nothing escapes when I open the lid. And, that makes identification hard if I'm trying to track it down in my office. But yeah, we have a ton of identification and like diagnostic resources, as well as, webinars like this, where we're available to answer questions, and things like Garden Hour, where there's sort of an assortment of us on every week talking about different things. So utilize us, that's what we're here for. And it is very cool to kind of see what's happening out in the state and, work with folks to come up with successful and sometimes creative solutions. So for management recommendations, um, you're going to want to look at, if you have pest populations, what they are, and then what's your level of tolerance for damage. So, you know, maybe you are totally just swamped with zucchini and you no longer care whether that plant lives or dies. Or it could be something like, your green beans and you're still really enjoying them and you're annoyed with whatever is eating them. So your level of tolerance for damage could vary based on crop and also time of year. When we're looking on sort of an agronomic scale, many crops have a research-based economic injury level. And so this is the level where the cost of treatment is going to be less than the cost of the economic loss. So where it financially makes sense to treat. Because sometimes if your economic, if your loss is minimal, you could throw a treatment out there, but that treatment is going to be more expensive and you'll end up losing money. We don't have those kinds of economic injury levels for backyard gardens, but we're sort of mimicking that concept. And, the main goal of your IPM program is keeping your pest level below the level where they're causing intolerable damage. So again, it's going to vary by crop. It's going to vary by person. I have a pretty high tolerance for damage because I'm mostly gardening for the insects and the birds that are in my backyard. But if you've got a prize rosebush and you're entering it into the state fair, your levels might be different, and that's totally okay. Prevention and exclusion are both strategies that rely on sort of physical or mechanical control to keep pests off of plants. They can be things like planting resistant varieties. I remember gardening in Pennsylvania back in grad school, and we had late blight move through tomatoes one year. And at that point, we really didn't have many late blight resistant varieties, especially not for things like cherry tomatoes or some of the smaller varieties. So after the tomato industry got hit real hard with that, there was a sort of renewed interest in getting more late blight resistant varieties. And then once they came on the market, a lot of people adopted them. So that can be one option, especially with plant diseases. Changing your planting time. If you have a long enough growing season, you can maybe put things in the ground a little bit later to get past some of the insect issues, especially things that are maybe migrating through or emerging at a certain time and sort of picking the closest thing they find. And then knowing the difference between a preventative treatment and a curative treatment. If you are somebody who's growing a lot of fruit crops, you may already know this, but many of the treatments for some of the diseases and even some of the insects are preventative. So they are put out before you have the problem. And it's, based on timing, perhaps temperature or how far along the bloom is on the plant. But those are essentially to make sure that it kills anything that is coming to the plant sort of early. And you do generally have to keep those up for a certain period of time versus a curative treatment where this is a treatment you have seen and identified the problem and the damage, and you are putting something out there, so it's not going to undo damage that has already happened, but it is going to hopefully stop or reduce future damage. So yeah, preventative treatments can be really valuable for certain things, especially with fungi. But you do have to be super on it as far as observing the plant growth stages and then also the timing and the weather conditions. So if you are a fruit tree producer or growing some fruit, definitely make sure you're checking out Dr. John Ball's Tree Pest Alert because he has a lot of information in there on when those treatments should be happening. You are going to want to utilize multiple management strategies. I think sometimes people think with insects that insecticides are the only option, and that's really not the case. There are lots of other things that you can do to help minimize any issues with insects and also to help cultivate a really robust ecosystem that's also going to help you manage some of those pests. So, biological control is a really big one. It also means you get more cool insects in your backyard. And so, we do have that natural enemy guide, which covers sort of many of the common natural enemy insects that we have in South Dakota. Cultural control, so we talked about resistance, but also things like tillage, cover crops, rotating crops. Those are all, sort of under the cultural control umbrella. And again, those are some non-chemical solutions. You can use mulch, trap crops, cultivation, especially as like some of the tillage and cultivation things are really helpful with weed issues if you're trying to avoid using herbicides. But then there's also balancing that with some of the soil health principles like we talked about last week. And then chemical control, also an option. It is important to note that organic pesticides are still pesticides. So even if you're using something in your backyard that is organically labeled, you do want to make sure that you're still reading the label, following those directions, and using any personal protective equipment and making sure that you're storing and disposing of that product properly. So you know, even horticultural vinegar. So for a weed example, we have vinegar in our kitchens, but it's, diluted to 5% acetic acid, whereas vinegar that you are possibly using for killing plants is, 50%, even up to 100% acetic acid. And that can be pretty dangerous if you're not using the appropriate safety equipment. So going back to that whole, adage of the dose makes the poison. And this is a little bit of a spoiler for Thursday's presentation, but climate and weather monitoring is also really important. You can use phenology, so that's the timing of when something is happening, out in nature to help inform your management decisions. So, like we were talking about with the fruit trees, like knowing when the bloom is going to occur might help you time some of your preventative treatments. But we have a lot of climate tools and a degree day tool on the climate website. So I've got the link there. And I know if you join us on Thursday, that Laura Edwards, our state climatologist, is going to be covering even more about climate and weather for the upcoming season, as well as what tools are available through SDSU. So the final step of your IPM program is reassessing the effect. Was it successful? Did your management strategy or strategies work? If you do spray something, make sure that you're scouting 1 to 3 days after treatment. So don't just sort of set it and forget it. Make sure that you're getting back out there. Things like aphids, some of our other insects, are actually resistant to certain active ingredients that are out there as far as insecticides go. So you could spray something and nobody dies. So that is an important thing to know. So make sure that you're going back out there after treating to do some rescouting. And then adapting every year to changing conditions. I mentioned the garden journals, and those are great for record keeping and then reviewing what kind of season you had. It can be really easy right now to think like, yep, I am going to remember everything. It's going to be a memorable year. And then by the time you get to August or September, you are thoroughly sunburnt, have had heat stroke twice, and you no longer care about the details. You're just waiting for the first frost. So keeping track of changing conditions, recording Rainfall, that kind of thing can be helpful year to year when making decisions. So for solving pest problems, decide how much damage you can tolerate, identify the problem, start with the least toxic control and move up if needed. Make sure that you're reading and following any label directions and wearing proper protective clothing and following safety protocols, which counts for chemical and non-chemical treatments. If you're out there with a weed whacker, make sure that you've got eye protection on as well. So it's not just chemicals that we're worried about. I am going to take a real quick look at the question here because I'm sort of at the halfway point with my presentation. So I'm going to grab a sip of water, answer this question, and then we're going to move on to looking at cool pictures of bugs. Okay, so the question we have, the sticky sheets, the yellow sticky cards, this person is using them occasionally when they get fungus gnats in the house, but not in the garden, which yes, absolutely, they can be used indoors. And if you are having fungus gnat problems, the closer you put them to the infested plants, the better, like the faster they'll get caught. Um, so they've got bees, so they're concerned that they might be attracted to the yellow. Yeah, absolutely. That yellow is sort of a universally attractive color for a lot of insects. So there will be bycatch on sticky cards. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you're not cool with that, totally fine. You don't have to use that monitoring tool. Um, Usually I'll see like a cabbage white butterfly stuck to one. They're not very good directional flyers. There are some beetles that'll get stuck to that and then actually have enough strength that they can wiggle themselves off. So sometimes it's a little annoying with like striped cucumber beetles. You're like, I know there was a beetle here, and then 5 minutes later it's gone. But yeah, those yellow sticky cards are non-selective. If you are putting them out in your garden, you may consider placing them sort of lower in the canopy so they're not sort of at the same level as the flowers or other things that might be attractive to pollinators. But yeah, you're absolutely going to maybe snag a honeybee or two, depending on where you have them placed. Let's see. And then suggestions for treating insects organically when the beehive is 5 feet from the garden. So that's a really, uh, yeah, that's a really specialized problem. I know when we've got folks who have bees out in fields, depending on the treatment, they will be closing the bees up and doing the treatment and then waiting before they let the bees back out. So depending on what pest issues you're dealing with, that might be an option if you have to do something that's more over the entire garden. But some of the treatments might really depend on what insects you're seeing and what plants are having a problem. Um, the question says they've used diatomaceous earth on the soil, but not on the leaves, and they've used neem oil. So, and the thing with diatomaceous earth is it only sort of lasts as long as it doesn't get watered away. So, if you have drip irrigation or it rains, the diatomaceous earth is going to no longer be effective. Neem oil is really very good against our soft-bodied insects, so things like aphids, but it's not necessarily going to be super helpful against some different beetles. So this would be one where I'd recommend that you shoot me an email and include some more details about what plants are being impacted and what insects you're seeing impact those plants. Um, Also, one thing too is plants can handle a lot of defoliation. So I think too, sometimes we see, obviously this picture here with Japanese beetles, they have completely skeletonized those leaves. Like that is a lethal amount of defoliation, but um, plants can handle, 20 to 30% defoliation and be entirely fine. Um, they really have to lose a lot of leaf tissue for it to, level up to something that's going to impact production. So I'm going to move into showing some pictures of some things that you might find in your garden, some things that I've found when I've been out and about with either master gardeners or in my own backyard. But this is one of my newest favorite pictures. This is from Master Gardener training last year out in Rapid City. One of the trainees came back with their net full of insects, and when we shook everything out, we had these two critters both at the same time, which was very exciting. Because at first glance, these are both little tubes of green goo. They might look fairly similar to you, but they are two very different insects. So on the right, we have a caterpillar. So this is going to be one of our things that's chomping on plants, maybe chomping on something that you like. It will turn into some sort of butterfly or moth, so like that part's cool. But this is one of our, biomass movers, one of our herbivores. And then on the left, we have a syrphid fly larva. So this tube of goo is actually technically a maggot. It's a fly larva. It doesn't have any discernible legs on it like our fun little caterpillar friend. It just has a mouth part, no head capsule. But this actually moves around and eats aphids off of plants. So you may never have known what this was, or maybe you've seen it and just ignored it or just thought it was a caterpillar, but it's one of our natural enemies. So it's also a biomass mover, but it is one of our carnivores. It's one of our predators. I'll put in my plug for wasps. These are two examples of solitary wasps. So these are wasps that live singly by themselves. They don't have a big colony to go with them. We have our cicada killer on the left, and then we have our steel blue cricket hunter on the right. And these both will catch large insects, paralyze them, and use them to feed their young. Obviously, cicada killers, as the name suggests, are going to be taking out cicadas, and then our cricket hunter is going to be specializing in crickets. So they might look big and scary, but they are out there eating things out of the trees and out of the garden. But yeah, wasps can be pretty great. They are pollinators, they are predators. They're not as fuzzy as bees, but they do visit flowers and they do also, hunt caterpillars and other things out of our garden. Where we get in trouble with wasps is our middle and our right here are both social species. So if you are near their nest, they might be have some feelings about that and come after you. So this is the time of year. If social wasps are nesting somewhere you don't want them to be, now's the time of year to get rid of those nests and to keep up with that before they get to maximum size in August and September. But I'm a fan of the wasps in my yard. They do good work, and we kind of stay out of each other's way. And they do provide pollination services as well as being predators. So these pictures are our very classic fuzzy bumblebees in the center and right. We also have some longhorn bees up here on the sunflower as well. And then on the left, we've got some green metallic bees hanging out on the basil. So these are all pollinators. I usually don't have to convince people that these are insects that you should want to be, hanging out in your yard or garden. Obviously, you need flowers for these insects to be there. And when, timing management, especially chemical management, you want to make sure that you're avoiding blooming plants or the times when blooms are open and these insects are active. So here we have some more biomass movers of the herbivore variety. So on the left side, we have aphids on a milkweed plant. These are milkweed aphids. Entomologists can be sometimes not super creative with naming. Hold on one second. I gotta grab some water. All right. Sorry about that. I figured I could either struggle through or just grab the water now. Um, but yeah, so aphids on the milkweed aphid. Entomologists are sometimes not super creative with naming. We're like, what is the insect and what is it on? Bam, there's our name. But yeah, we've got a lot of them in one place to the point that they're probably attracting natural enemies. We've got, you can kind of see some of the sticky residue, that extra honeydew underneath. On something like milkweed, I discourage people from doing any sort of management because milkweed actually supports a whole ecosystem of insects. It's not just the monarch butterfly. Like there's all sorts of things that are utilizing milkweed. So we don't want to put any chemicals on it because we don't want to impact monarchs, but also, we can sort of let this keystone species do its thing. If you saw that on maybe your lettuce, that would be, something worth considering management. On the right, we have a cute little nymph of probably a two-striped grasshopper. When grasshoppers are small, that's when you want to be working on them. Once they get to be full size and have their wings, they've done the maximum amount of damage already, and they're going to be really hard to control. With, how hot it is right now, grasshoppers are going to be having a pretty great time. Usually it's cool, wet springs that help kind of knock down grasshopper populations, but we've got some nice hot, dry weather. I think the grasshoppers are going to be doing pretty okay this year. And if your garden is the only green thing, that's when grasshoppers become an issue in backyard gardens. Let's see. Obviously, these guys are not friends, especially if you are in the southeastern corner of South Dakota, so the Sioux Falls area, all the way up the I-29 corridor. We've got Japanese beetles, in Brookings at McCrory Gardens every year, possibly even up as far north as Watertown. They are an introduced insect, and I grew up in Pennsylvania, shaking these into peanut butter jars of soapy water. So the adult beetle is hard to control chemically. You can pick them off physically. I do not recommend the pheromone traps because those are very attractive, which you might think, oh, that's a good thing. But they're so attractive that they will pull sort of all the Japanese beetles in like a 2 mile area. And then once that trap is full, the beetles won't be dead. They'll be sort of attracted and hanging out in the vicinity, eating all of your stuff. So don't use the pheromone traps. You focus management on these on the grub stage when they're feeding in lawns. So if you're in a Japanese beetle area, we'll probably have some more info on those coming out soon on the website, but you can always email us for more specific recommendations. This insect is actually a friend. It's kind of camouflaged here, but this is a green lacewing. The larvae of green lacewings are great predators of aphids. So if you turn on your porch light at night and you see these little green insects flying around, probably means you've got the nymphs somewhere and they're helping you out in your garden. So this set, we've got the gangs all here. We've got everything from our pests, from our aphids, but we have some of their predators. We've got our lacewing, or not our lacewing larva, we've got our syrphid fly larva, we have our ladybug larva. So if you've seen these little guys, I kind of like to call them alligators. But if you've seen them in your garden, they are running around eating aphids for you. So while aphids can occur in large numbers, there's also a large number of insects that eat them. Aphids are really the plankton of the garden world. They support a lot of predators and they pull a lot of biomass from plants and then move that up through the food chain. We also have some more friends here. We've got a ladybug pupa on the left. So if you've seen anything that looks like this in your garden, that means you've got essentially like a ladybug nursery. You've had the little alligators crawling around and then they found a place that was safe enough to pupate. And then soon you'll have an adult ladybug. And then over here, the very small tan circle there is actually what's called an aphid mummy. So there are tiny little wasps, and they will lay their eggs inside an aphid. The wasp hatches the egg, and it eats the aphid from the inside, and then uses the aphid as its pupal chamber. So if you've got a colony of aphids and you notice the little mummies every now and then, that means that you've also got the parasitoid wasps in your ecosystem helping you out. You should absolutely be cool with spiders. They are great generalist predators. I love the little jumping spiders. They're a pretty charismatic creature. They've got cute little feet. They tilt their head. They're pretty friendly. And I have them, they'll hang out on my back door and they'll eat gnats. It's really quite nice. But yeah, be cool with spiders. We have a whole guide on them. Absolutely stop by and see me on Sunday and I'll give you one. But yeah, one of the main points here is that don't fight nature. Nature will generally overall prevail and you will not win. Um, but use what you know to work with your backyard ecosystem. So, learning more about, the various insects and other organisms that call your backyard home along with you, you can kind of find a balance there and be successful in your garden and also successful in creating some really nice habitat for a lot of cool things. Resources wise, obviously we have all the extension websites. Bugguide.net is also a great one for insect identification, especially if you've just found something cool and you want to know what it is. Garden Insects is a book by Whitney Cranshaw. That one is great for having the insects organized by what kind of damage they cause. So instead of having to know off the bat that something is a beetle, you can be like, I have leaf defoliation and check out the leaf defoliator section. And then the Discover Life keys are really useful. I use those a lot for caterpillar identification. Some upcoming events, I did mention Garden Hour. So that 2025 season is rolling. We have an episode tonight. Dr. Rhoda Burrows is hosting, and we've got our new weeds field specialist, Greg Reichs, will be joining her, along with Hans Klopp, our soil field specialist. This series, Backyard Natural Resources, we've got one more session on Thursday, May 15th, and that's going to be Laura Edwards and Dr. Christine Lang talking about upcoming weather and climate conditions and then how to garden with those conditions in mind. I mentioned Garden Discovery Fest is this Sunday, May 18th at McCrory Gardens. I believe it's 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, something like that, but it's in the afternoon. Come see a whole bunch of us. We'll have lots of resources and activities for kids. And then I always close out the season with Insect Fest, which this year is September 6th at McCrory Gardens. So if you want a whole afternoon devoted to cool bug stuff, make plans to join us in September. But with that, I'm happy to take questions. I'll throw my contact information up here real quick before I stop sharing, and I'll let Robin field some questions for me.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. We've got a question here from a first-time potato grower last season. They had horrible infestation by ash gray blister beetles. They recently planted potatoes in grow bags and are going to try to place them away from the main garden on the patio. Do you think that will be helpful in controlling the nasty blister beetles? Or is there another method that will work better?
So blister beetles are really interesting in that their life cycle is closely tied to that of grasshoppers. So blister beetle larvae actually they eat grasshopper eggs and other things in the soil. So if you are in an area, especially if you're in a more rural gardening setting and you've got lots of alfalfa around or otherwise lots of grasshoppers, you're probably going to see blister beetles again, which is going to be unfortunate. Um, and they kind of will move in all at once and then head out again. So for something like potatoes in grow bags, one thing that you might want to consider is putting some like row cover or netting over those plants. I know in South Dakota, wind can be a real tricky consideration, but um, physically creating a barrier is probably going to be the most successful on blister beetles, especially because with potatoes, you're not worried about the plants flowering. So you don't need to allow access for pollinators. You can just net those plants, put them in a little mini cage or whatever, and keep the blister beetles off. Because otherwise, the other solution is again the soapy water thing, but blister beetles will exude cantharidin, which can irritate your skin. So you want to wear gloves if you're picking them off. But I would say I would try a physical barrier on those potatoes and just really keep an eye out scouting wise for not only grasshoppers, but also knowing if you are in an area with agronomic crops, knowing what crops are around you. Because blister beetles do really like alfalfa. So when alfalfa gets mowed, the blister beetles will move out of that. So if you've got a neighbor with alfalfa and that gets mowed, like that's your cue to like protect your plants.
Okay, we've got one more question here, and I think I know the answer to it, but I'll go ahead. So the question is, some gardeners purchase praying mantises and ladybugs as beneficial bugs for their gardens. Do you recommend this?
Oh man, no, I don't recommend it. And here's why. So back when I was in grad school, there was a community garden in like one of the nearby towns, and they wanted to do a ladybug release, and they wanted someone, from the entomology department. So I was like, yeah, sure. Went out, did a program with them. We released ladybugs. The ladybugs all took off. So one, purchased insects, like they have no loyalty to you. Like they're not gonna stick around. They're gonna go explore the world. But also like the more sustainable option is to be cultivating a habitat where you are recruiting the native lady beetles, the mantises that already live in South Dakota, those things to make a home in your backyard. These are predators, so like praying mantises aren't going to hang out in large numbers. You're maybe going to have one or two in a backyard because otherwise they will compete and sometimes eat each other. Same kind of deal with ladybugs. We do see those in a higher population density normally, but again, they're predators. You're not going to have a ton of like lady beetle larvae on one plant because too much competition, they'll start eating each other. So yeah, save your money or don't use your money for bringing in insects. Use your money for choosing native plants that are going to create habitat for these insects. And also, you can save your money by avoiding or minimizing your use of some of the insecticide controls because those will also can impact those predator populations and your pests, like your aphids, for example, are going to rebound a lot faster than, say, for example, your ladybug population is. So create the habitat, and then you're going to have ladybugs, for example, every year versus, bringing them in. Also, when we purchase insects online to release outdoors, we don't know how they were raised. Were they wild caught? Was that done ethically? And also, they can be bringing in disease to our native insect populations.
All right, and it looks like that is the last question that we have. I did also put a link to a quick survey into the chat as well, so please go ahead and fill that out just about information that you might like more of for future Backyard Natural Resources webinars. And with that, that concludes our third session. Please join us again on Thursday at 12:30 because we're going to have Dr. Christine Lang talking about gardening in a drought and Dr. Laura Edwards talking about the climate outlook for us here this spring and summer. So that will be very informative, I believe, based on what the current conditions are. So anyway, with that, we will see you all on Thursday, hopefully. So thank you, Amanda.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Robin.